Good evening, great to have your company this evening. On the 25th of April 1915, 8 months into the First World War, Allied soldiers landed on the shores of the Gallipoli Peninsula. This was Turkish territory that formed part of Germany's ally. The Allied forces encountered unexpectedly strong resistance from the Turks, and both sides suffered enormous loss of life. The forces from New Zealand and Australia fighting as part of the Anzac played a very important part in the Gallipoli campaign. At its beginning, people at home greeted with excitement that news that our soldiers were at last finally engaged in war. It was short-lived. New Zealand soldiers distinguished themselves with their courage and skill, establishing an enduring bond with the Australians they fought alongside. The Gallipoli campaign was, however, a costly failure for the Allies, who after 9 months abandoned it and evacuated their surviving troops. Approximately a fifth of the New Zealanders taking part had been killed. Although Anzac Day, the anniversary of the first day of major conflict, does not mark a military triumph, it does remind us of a very important episode in New Zealand's history. Great suffering was caused to a small country by the loss of so many of its young men. But the Gallipoli campaign also showcased amazing spirits and attitude that helped New Zealand define itself as a nation. Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Lynch and welcome to a special edition of Lynched. So what have we learned from anything when it comes to war? And do we celebrate or commemorate Anzac Day? Well, joining me tonight is the Christchurch President of the RSA, Pete Dawson. And good evening to you, Pete.
Good evening, Chris.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us here.
You're absolutely most welcome. How do we ensure, Pete, to a younger generation that Anzac Day and the history of war remains relevant and remains vital to our history?
Chris, I think that from my experience over the last 10 years that we really don't need to remind our young people. They already know. I look at the attendances at the dawn service on Anzac Day. I see the young people laying poppies and laying wreaths. I know that this Saturday we're going to have at least 2 or 3 youth groups with 200 kids coming along to the dawn service to pay their respects. I think the big thing is to make people in New Zealand understand what is the significance of what we're doing. It's not celebration, it's commemoration. It's all about the sacrifice that went before. Right or wrong, it's about the sacrifice.
You have been involved in many dawn services, particularly here in Christchurch. Are you humbled by the response from previous years of the different generations that do pay the respects, that do turn up to the various services we have, not just in Christchurch, Pete, but up and down New Zealand?
Yeah, I am. Every year I watch the youth groups coming through, be it the New Zealand Cadet Force, be it St John Ambulance, for example, with their youth group, the Scouts, the Guides, the church groups, you know, the Boys Brigade. They turn up every year, they parade, they lay their wreaths, and to me that's the most significant factor of remembrance, in that they understand that we're there to commemorate their families that have gone before. You know, when you think about it, apart from New Zealanders, there is hardly a family in New Zealand that has not been affected by this war.
It was a major war, wasn't it?
It was a major war.
Both wars.
Both wars, in fact, but World War I particularly, we were a population of just over 1 million, and we sent 105,000 New Zealanders, soldiers and nurses overseas. Of those, 18,500 never returned. Now that's 10% of our population went away, and 18% of those who went away never returned home. They're buried in distant lands. You only have to go through the war graves in France and Turkey and see those commemorations, and you'll know the commitment that our country made to a foreign war.
From the RSA point of view, you have members that served obviously in probably World War II. What do they tell you? Do they like to engage in conversation about the various wars they've been in?
Well, it varies between members, but generally speaking, even my own father didn't discuss the things he went through. He talked about the good times, he talked about the camaraderie, he talked about his mates, and the great things that happened, but he didn't talk about the fact that he was wounded, that he was blown out of his landing craft and all the other bits and pieces. I had to find that out later, and that's pretty general about what happens with these guys. They don't like to talk about it. In fact, even young people today, the young servicemen overseas, don't really recognise the fact that they're veterans.
But they are.
They are. They've served. They've gone on deployment overseas. They're veterans. They're people who have represented their country. When I was in the services, and I'm a between the war baby, all I saw was veterans that had the Vietnam medals, 2 of them, on their chest. Now I'm seeing young soldiers that have got 5 or 6 or 7, but they still don't consider themselves to be veterans.
I want to talk about that younger generation shortly, but you make an interesting point, the same for my grandfather. When he was alive, would never want to engage in conversation about the war, and I suspect part of that is probably because of the pain and the potential for post-traumatic stress. However, later on in his life, when I think he knew the end was coming for him, he started to speak more openly about the war, about his knowledge, which was quite interesting because for so long, Pete, I knew my grandfather and we never once had that conversation about what he experienced in World War II, but I got the impression towards his later years, when he was essentially dying, I suppose, he wanted to engage with me. He wanted to talk about what he saw. He wanted to almost be proud of what him and his brothers had seen and done, the good and the bad.
I think that comes down to a whole series of psychological issues for the soldiers. As you say, one of the comments you made was the post-traumatic stress disorder situation, and that was a condition that has only recently become well known. But we also have the situation of the fact that these guys saw things that no young New Zealander should ever see. We have to face that. The trauma of living in the trenches, the trauma particularly in World War I of the rats and the flies and the bodies, and the fact that they were making very little ground for very huge effort and loss of life. These things must have an impact on a person's psyche, and consequently they prefer to remember the good times. You know, I remember my father, who was a merchant serviceman and then a Royal Navy guy, talking about coming back to the ship a little bit drunk. 3 of them arm in arm. 1 got up the gangway, the other 2 went either side and into the harbour. You know, they were the funny things that they talked about, but they didn't really talk about the fact that they were blown up and thrown overboard, that they had to survive in the water, that, you know, in my dad's case, woke up in a hospital in London. To them, it was something that was personal. It was something for them and their mates. They went to the RSA. They talked about it amongst their mates. But they didn't talk to their family, they didn't talk to their friends, they talked amongst themselves, the guys who had had similar experiences.
We need to take a break, but I want to pick you up after the break about the young generation and making sure that we either inspire them or ask them, I guess, what lessons we've learned, if any, from war. That's next. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Lynched. Joining me tonight is the Christchurch President of the RSA, Pete Dawson. Pete, I want to pick you up on something interesting you said, that some of the conflicts that we face today in the Middle East, Afghanistan in particular and Iraq, and some of the soldiers that are almost based here in Christchurch, they come back but they don't think of them as veterans, but they are, aren't they, regardless of what war they serve in. In a way, Anzac Day, I believe, is a chance to, not celebrate's the wrong word of course, but to commemorate and honour the service, regardless of the rights and wrongs that every soldier in this country plays.
I agree entirely, and I just wish that we could make the young soldier understand that they are veterans. Maybe I'm wronging them by making that statement, but I kind of get the impression that they feel that their tour of duty might have been 6 months or 9 months in a war zone, and therefore they maybe don't relate to World War I or World War II, where the guys were away for 5 or 6 years of their life. But the fact is they were in harm's way. They were in a combat zone. They were being fired upon. And we know that we've lost soldiers from our local community in Afghanistan recently. And it is, from our point of view at the RSA, these guys are very much part of our organisation. They are our veterans. We want them to be part of us. We need the community to understand that these guys went out there and put their lives in harm's way, and we should be respecting that.
And my understanding, of course, now is we have members of our armed forces already in Afghanistan. Correct. Of course, regardless of the rights or wrongs, so who knows what's going on. But what do you make of the situation now when you hear about the fact that even today, no matter how small the numbers are, we're still playing a part in some war in Iraq to do with some evil organisation called ISIS? It's hard to comprehend, isn't it?
It's hard to comprehend, but the young soldier today, and when I use the term soldier, I'm using it generically. It doesn't matter whether they're Army, Air Force or Navy. The young serving member today, they have a role to play, and they will carry out their orders, and they will carry it out with valour. They will do the job that's required of them because that's what they signed on to do. It's whether or not the political reasons are the correct reasons is not for them to argue.
What do your members tell you? Do you have conversations at your organisation about ISIS, about the current day fights? Are they interested in talking about it? Do they take a wide berth from it? What do they tell you, Pete?
Well, I guess that no matter where you go, there's a diverse opinion. Because let's face it, the current situation, the current deployment is a very political situation. So we have members, of course, that are on one side or the other. But one thing is for quite clear, as far as the RSA is concerned, we are 100% between our guys and girls out there, 100%, because we didn't commit them there. But we know that we have to support them there.
Because they're doing a job regardless of what political fence they sit on.
Correct.
They've signed up, they have to go.
Well, I think that all of them that have gone are volunteers. Every conflict that New Zealanders have gone into have been volunteers. And I think that today these guys have gone away. They deserve our support, not the argument of whether or not they should have not gone. That's not for us to determine, and it's certainly not for them to determine. The issue now is whether or not we support them while they're there. You know, these guys, their lives are precious. We need to be behind them. We need to show them that we care. We need to show that we support, and the RSA will always do that. That's our role.
And of course, I think what's important to note too is the RSA would welcome them when they return.
Most definitely. Every serving soldier in New Zealand is automatically a member of the RSA, regardless of whether they sign up and pay a subscription or not. The fact that they have attested into the armed forces, the Defence Forces, they are members of the RSA. We welcome them, we cherish them, we look after them, we support them.
I want to talk about some of the younger members of the RSA, or perhaps some of the things that the RSA actually does for some young people in Christchurch. Talk to me about that, Pete, because I was unaware, and I'm glad that you brought that up on my radio show, because I think it's very important for the people at home to know this.
Well, we as an RSA, we have a role within the community. Our primary role, of course, is to support veterans and ex-service personnel in times of hardship. But we also try to reach out into the community, because it's not just our community. We are part of them, they are part of us. And we try wherever possible to provide support for young people, particularly in outward bound courses. We've given support to young people who have applied to us to go on particular courses or training or experience, where we believe that by supporting those people, we'll be producing leaders for the future. And that's what our role is to make certain not only that we look after the leaders of the past, but we look after the leaders of the future as well. And we try to do that. our support is limited because we can't use our poppy fund for that, but wherever we have welfare funds available, we will support wherever we can.
Good to hear. We're going to take a break. When we return, we'll talk about that younger generation too, and making sure, with the greatest respect, how do we make sure the RSA remains relevant into the future? Do stay with us. Welcome back. Joining me tonight is the Christchurch President of the RSA, Pete Dawson. Pete, the Poppy Fund. It's interesting to hear you say that money is completely ring-fenced, isn't it? For what purpose?
It's ring-fenced to assist veterans, ex-service personnel, and their wives, their family, their dependents, I should say, and their widows. It came about through the whole formation of the RSA, which happened in Christchurch, believe it or not, in 1915, December 1915, where the first wounded soldiers came back from Gallipoli via Egypt, and there was a guy called Captain Donald Simpson who got the wounded guys together and said, look, we're wounded, we're coming home, we've got to rehabilitate into our community and reassimilate, but there's going to be a lot more of us. How can we help them? And from that, the genesis of the RSA occurred, and it became a situation where, with the first returned soldiers club in Christchurch, we now have 182 RSAs throughout the country, and the job was to try and look at bringing these guys home, helping them wherever possible, and getting them back into the community. And you can imagine at the end of World War I, it was a huge job. The same at the end of World War II. And that's what the RSA has done. So we had the Poppy Fund, and the Poppy Fund, as I said, is collected every year, and the money is ring-fenced. It can only be used to help those guys. It can't be used for the youth, as we spoke before. It has to be to help our guys that need the help. We've done a number of things. We've, every year we're sending out, we've just spent $25,000 here in Christchurch to assist the Malayan Veterans Association to get research done at the University of Canterbury into the effects of the insecticide that was used on their uniforms and applied on their body during their campaign in Borneo and Malaya. The Vietnam veterans have had the funding for Agent Orange, but the impact of this particular insecticide has also been significant. So we as an RSA underwrote the $25,000 of research. We also have done things like mobility scooters. We have, I think, 8 of them at the moment that we give out to the guys at no cost. If they need them, they can get them. We also provide access to homes by putting in wheelchair ramps where the guys, we try to pick up the gaps that, for example, VANS, the Veterans Affairs, or ACC or WINS or whatever is not filling up, and we pick them up. We're helping guys with cataract operations, we help guys with hearing aids, we help guys with spectacles, dentures. We have also gone out and provided firewood, for example, for people in Little River just recently with the flooding. A veteran husband and wife, both of them veterans, who were really in a big problem. Their whole property was inundated, so we provided firewood.
This is nice to hear, Pete, because these are the good stories you don't hear enough about. Do you get frustrated by that?
Well, yes, I do. We get a lot of brickbats, but having said that, I guess perhaps we need to be more focused on putting those good news stories out there. But the RSA has never really been good at telling its own tale. And perhaps this is great why I'm here with you tonight.
I think it is good.
I think it's tremendous.
Speaking of, I want to talk about that brand new looking spanking building. It is great, isn't it? It looks sensational.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Look at it there. I think this is the open day.
Yep.
That must have been a great day for you. You had dignitaries, VIPs there, and of course some current RSA members. To me, this symbolises the ongoing commitment that I think we have in this country on how we treat and respect our veterans or anybody who returns from service in any type of war conflict. Do you agree?
I agree. It's been a long journey for us. there are veterans on parade at the moment at the opening, and that building represents four and a bit years, I think 4 years and 1 month from the day that our building was destroyed. Arguing with insurance companies, of course, and finally getting the funds in to start looking at providing us a new home.
You've had insurance issues, have you, Pete?
Oh yes, who else hasn't? You know, we're no different to anybody else in Christchurch.
Listen, we're fastly moving out of time, but I do want to quickly sneak in this bridge of remembrance.
Yeah.
I'm an impatient man, probably you are too. I just want to get this thing fixed. It's probably more important that it's on Armistice Day as opposed to Anzac Day, but still, what are you hearing? When is this thing going to be fixed, Pete?
Well, we think that, to be fair, the council and Sarah have done a good job up until now. It hasn't happened as quick as we would like it to happen, but we really also understand that the damage to the structure is far more than the eye can see.
I do get excited at least when I see, scaffolding around it. Does that suggest, I mean, are you hearing any rumours or any discussion as to when this bridge will be fully open again?
Well, the word we're hearing is it'll be available to us for Armistice Day this year.
Fantastic.
We wouldn't use it for Anzac Day anyway because the crowds are too big. But Armistice Day, it would be really great if we're there, and I understand it's on schedule for that.
Good.
Yeah.
Perhaps finally, Pete, what is the message you have for those watching this program when it comes to the commemoration of our soldiers? And I want to particularly point to World War I and II first.
My message to people is that don't argue the politics. Don't argue the rightness or the wrongness. Think about the fact that your men and women left this country for whatever reason to go overseas and give of their lives for the freedom we have today. And they did that in 2 wars. And I think that that is the sole purpose of Anzac. We also have to remember that there's an A in Anzac, and it talks about our friends over the water in Australia. We're huge competitors on the sports field and in a lot of other areas, but when it comes to a stoush, we're shoulder to shoulder, back to back. And we need to remember that. We've got a huge alliance there. The Anzac name is renowned throughout the world, and I think that we need to commemorate that for years to come. Not just this first century, but for the next century as well.
And do you think we will continue to commemorate Anzac in a both local and international way?
As long as the RSA is in existence, yes, that's going to happen. It's our role. We consider ourselves the guardians of remembrance.
Nicely said. Pete Dawson from the RSA, really nice to have you back on the program.
Chris, thank you very much.
And all the very best to you, my friend.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Same. Thank you.
And that is our show. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.